Hello, this is Eldoric The Guardian Tank, here with another quick tutorial video, this time on some basic tanking theory. We're going to be talking about development legacy. Now, a lot of times you wonder why your toon is the way it is, or why class, or why healing is the way it is. Well, it has a lot to do with development legacy, and that's where we're going to hop in and discuss this time. Alright, well, I actually brought out my new beta monk here, training him to be a tank and getting used to that particular tanking spec. A lot of fun, has a lot of integrated parts from other tanking classes. And the interesting thing about this class, much like you once had with the Death Knight, is it has no tanking legacy. So they can kind of make it whatever they want, and that's okay. But other classes, other roles don't quite have that luxury because of the long history they have in this game. Alright, so we're going to break this down very quickly. Development legacy. Well, there's three kinds of it. One is game legacy, one is role legacy, and one is class legacy. And most of the time you focus on only one of those, but they're all important because they all intertwine with each other. They affect one another. What is game legacy? Game legacy is how the overarching mechanics of the game were once thought to affect how you play and how that changes over time. Using the example of threat. There was a time when threat was really important. DPS cared about it, healers cared about it, tanks cared about it. Over time, that game mechanic has changed to where it's not the most important thing. In fact, nowadays, it's a consideration, but not like you had in Vanilla WoW where DPS going over that threat limit could wipe a raid very, very easily. Now it's much easier to maintain threat, so it's not as much of a consideration. That's a change in the legacy of that system, and that can only happen over time. Now, roles have a development legacy too. There was a time when healers, let's say in Wrath, didn't care about mana. Spam your biggest heals all the time as fast as you can, worrying about spike damage. Well, that changed when you moved into Cataclysm, where you had a lot more emphasis on triage, maintaining mana, making sure you're using it very effectively throughout the fight. Well, that was a role change. The development theory behind how a healing class should work changed for that role. And then finally, you have class development legacy, and that is how your particular class was thought of in one expansion, how that thinking and development has changed from expansion to expansion. I'm going to talk real quick about class one because that's what most people really care about. I'm going to use the example of the Druid. In Vanilla WoW, the development theory behind that class was jack of all trades, master of none. They could do everything kind of okay, but not super terrifically well. This was to prevent everyone from just being a Druid because they could do everything just as well as a primary class. Why even have those other classes? At the time, this made sense. They didn't know how popular WoW was going to be. It would be a good idea to have a few druids that can fill a gap if you couldn't quite get that population of other class roles in there. Good theory, didn't pan out. Then they pushed them towards a primary healer role because they realized that jack of all trades really didn't work. Then you move into BC where they start to allow tanking. They allow a little more on the range damage front. Then you move into Wrath where they really expanded out. Okay, you can do that, blah, blah, blah. Then in Cataclysm where they balanced everything a lot better, made it a lot easier for the Druid to fill those roles because as the game changed, they realized you bring a class to fill a role. They're not really switching up. You spec and you gear and you gem and you do all that stuff to perform a role. So they did that, but then they had the issue of, well, you're still a Druid, you have access to all these abilities, so they had to limit you. So a Bear Druid, which was modeled off of a Warrior, had a lot less abilities, though some core ones, which made all the different aspects of the Druid, the different roles they could feel kind of shallow because they had to consider that they had all these other roles that they could fill. Then you move into Mist of Pandaria where they're stripping out tons of abilities that you don't need if you don't perform a role. Basically, you pick your spec. If you're a bear, they can make that bigger because then they can pull out cat DPS and range DPS moves, so you're not being overburdened and you don't have an unfair advantage over other classes. Well, that was the class legacy, their development legacy over time and how it changed. And sometimes they can't change that too quickly. Expansion to expansion is the easiest way. But even then, sometimes it could take several expansions to change a thinking on something. Okay, so how does that interact again with game and then role development legacy? Well, there was a time when tanks had so much avoidance that they were built around the idea of preventing spike damage and using cooldowns at specific times. That isn't fun because it's extremely twitchy. And so they moved on to like an active mitigation model that smooths out damage but still has participation. That's how they want the role to develop over time. Now, regardless on the class you pick or choose or if you choose many, sometimes you could say, like, why can't I do this? Why am I stuck playing rune textures as a Death Knight? Well, it's because the development legacy behind the Death Knight over time has kind of built up to where it's hard for them to maneuver out as something that has been established. In fact, in Mist of Pandaria, you're having one of the biggest overhauls and eliminations of a lot of that development legacy, like I talked about with the Druid, by taking abilities away. And all classes are getting that, and it's a good thing, particularly splitting the Feral spec into a Guardian spec and the Feral damage spec. That is a huge departure from the past, and eliminates a lot of the development legacy that they had and development problems that they had in the past. So when you think development legacy, think how things used to be in the past and how thinking has changed, and how that tale of changes kind of makes what your tune, what the game, and what your role is at any given time. Sometimes that's why, like, why can't Warlocks tank? Well, they have a development legacy behind them, and sometimes it's hard to move out of that. And that class legacy doesn't fit with what they want to do with the game. Alright, does it sound a little confusing? Well, it's a whole lot, but just keep in mind, the way your class is now is based on how it was in the past. And over time, their idea of what a class should be, a role should be, and a game should be has changed. But they can't automatically switch off everything they used to do in the past, and all those little things lead up to what you are today. Hence, you have development legacy. Alright, well, that's it for this time. Also, check out the Guardian Tank podcast available on iTunes, and check out the Guardian Tank website at theguardiantank.com. And until next time, this is Eldoric The Guardian Tank, and remember your past, because it affects your future.